This episode of the Nerdball Podcast is sponsored by Jake Paluski at Real JP Multimedia. He does the music for this podcast. He has produced this podcast. If you need anything audio-visual done, he is the man to see at realjp.com, REELJP.com. Let's start the show.
Hello, I'm Kelly Weinersmith, and this is the Nerdball Podcast.
This is the Nerdball Podcast with Lorenzo Melcher.
All right. Thanks, Kelly, for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So I told myself that I was going to do some sort of research and looking up things, and then I didn't.
That's totally okay.
So I got your I was told by your brother, my friend George, that you should have my sister on, and then he told me what you did, and then I was like, you're just now telling me about your sister and what she does? This sounds amazing.
I'm glad he's saying nice things. That's good to know.
Yeah, he's saying real nice things. So first of all, from what he told me, and you can probably explain it better, but this is how I explained it to my friends when he told me that you study zombie parasites or zombie fungus, and he sent me some videos, and it looks terrifying.
It is terrifying, and it's fair to call them zombies. So I don't study the zombie fungus, but I study zombie wasps, which I'd be happy to tell you about, and zombie fish. I didn't even know these things existed. Oh yeah, lots of zombies out there.
Yeah, so the video he showed me, and I've seen other ones, is this fungus gets in an ant and it crawls up a tree eventually, and it does a death bite, it's called, and then the spores just grow out of the ant, and it looked crazy. And I've seen videos before, but when I show people and they or tell them, they don't think stuff like that exists, and it's pretty remarkable.
It's crazy, and that's one of the better examples that we have. So this is called parasite manipulation of host behavior, or we just call it manipulation. And the idea here is that parasites can sort of hijack the behavior of their hosts to get them to do something that's bad for the host but good for the parasite. And like that, so that fungus, if you took you mentioned that the ant bites on a leaf. Yeah. If you take that leaf and you put it on the forest floor, little like critters like spiders will come along and eat the ant and the fungus and kill them both. And so that's bad for the fungus. And if you take that leaf with the ant and you put it too high up, then the humidity and the temperature are bad for fungal growth. Okay. And so like the ant is brought to this super specific place. It's like 21 centimeters off the forest floor, that's ideal for the fungus. And I'm like awful at estimating distances. My husband just like loves to laugh about how did I get this far in science without being able to tell you like what 21 centimeters is. But like the fact that this fungus can get the ant there by remote control is just like, it blows my mind. It's really cool.
Yeah. So we'll definitely get onto that, into all of that. But I do want to start with, did you grew up in Perrysburg, went to Perrysburg High School?
And I also went to Notre Dame.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. So first of all, I like asking, because I coach high school football in Perrysburg, and I like asking kids if they enjoy living in Perrysburg. And most of the times when you're in high school, you don't really enjoy it as much as when you get out and realize like, oh, it was a pretty cool place to live. What was your thoughts on living in Perrysburg?
I mean, that would pretty much be I agree. I didn't love it at the time. I can't say high school was like a favorite time of mine. Yeah. But now when I go back and visit my parents, I'm like, oh, there's actually a lot of trees here, and it's really pretty, and it's safe, and like Mr. Freeze is pretty cool. And, I think I appreciated it as much as I could have, but partly that was just because, I wasn't having a ton of fun in high school.
Okay. Yeah. Well, my wife's the same way. Like we talk about if we would go back to high school, would we? And she says no immediately. And I say yes, because I enjoyed high school, but I understand where she's coming from, where you're coming from. And it's not a fun time for everybody.
Yeah, that's right. But you know what? Like I made good friends, people I keep in touch with still. So
Sure. Yeah.
it's good.
Were you always into science, into that even in high school? Was that something you thought like, hey, this is what I want to do something with this?
Yeah, I wasn't sure exactly. So we had an anatomy and physiology class in that I took in high school with Mr. Asmith, I think was his name. And we did like cat dissections.
Mhm.
And I remember initially thinking like, oh, this is awful. And then I was like, whoa, there's all this stuff in here. And I was really fascinated. And then he took me to the Medical College of Ohio's Forensic Science Day. Like he took a couple people from the class to that. And it was just creepy and awesome. And I was just like, oh, I definitely want to do something science related. But I didn't end up going into forensic science, but parasites and dead bodies, they're all kind of creepy and it all works.
I used to work at MCO. It's called UTMC now. And our shop was also, they had the plastination area there. And it was creepy and awesome, just like you said, to see like and the doctor that ran it was really good. Like if we go in there, because we had to help him move sometimes move like bodies like in these big boxes or big things and help move things around. And and he would, if we had questions, like he would explain stuff to us. And it wasn't one of those, oh, you work for the ground crew, I didn't need to talk to you about anything. But he was so good at explaining things and answering our questions. And we could see there was a full body of just all the veins and everything, just all plastic, that they did this plastination. And it was such a cool thing to see.
I didn't know that we did plastination like in the Toledo area. That's awesome. My first date with my husband was actually the Body Worlds exhibit when it went through San Jose. Yeah, it was a creepy start to a good thing, but
that's all right. Yeah, it was a cool thing.
Yeah, I've never been up close. That's so cool that he was showing you that.
Yeah, and he would explain the process because he'd have these huge buckets of, I don't know what he called it, but it was ultimately what the plastic was. And like we'd have him move stuff around, and like the big chambers he used and all this different you walked through the hallway and he had all these little different models and stuff that he used to show students and stuff, and it was pretty neat. So after high school you go where do you go to college?
I went to Bowling Green State University, and I got a bachelor's and a master's there in biology. And while I was doing my master's degree, I think I taught your sister her intro bio course.
Okay, all right.
You have a sister, right, Misty?
I do, Misty. Yep, and I had another one, Martina, too. But yes, it would have been Misty. Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, so I got my bachelor's and my master's, and then I went to the University of California, Davis for a PhD in ecology. And then I was at Rice University for a postdoc for a while. And now I live in Virginia and I write books.
That is so much school. That is so much school. I would never, I have a 2-year degree and I'm good. And I'll do my continuing education, taking different classes and leadership courses and that kind of stuff. But what about school for you is like, I'm just going to keep going as far as I can go and do more?
I miss it even sometimes because it's an opportunity to learn stuff. It's like, I got lucky. I didn't have to, I still worked like almost full time at coffee shops when I was in college to make money. But like, most of the time I was just expected to like take classes on topics that were interesting and then just learn. And that sounded really, really cool to me. And I loved working on a PhD. It's a lot of work and it was hard, but at the same time, it's like, I'm just supposed to read about animal behavior for like 5 years. And I love this stuff. It's like, and so anyway, just reading about parasites and behavior, like, and getting paid to do that, like it should count as a job was just sort of surprising to me. And I like reading, I guess.
Well, that helps too. The way you explained, I get to learn about stuff that I like. I think that makes it sound interesting, but I think it's the beginning part for me where it's like, I don't want to take a music class right now. Like, why are you making me get in this room with 300 other people for music? I don't want it.
Yeah, I had to take a theater class that I just wasn't really feeling. And I like theater. I like giving public presentations. I was in the theater the drama program with Mr. Gentry at Perrysburg, and I loved it. But like when I had to take it, it was I don't know. I remember thinking like, this is all pretty expensive. I don't really see how this is going to help me. But so yeah, I took some classes I didn't love, but like the farther into school you go, the fewer of those classes you have to take. And the more the classes are interesting and like relevant, like organic chemistry, I've never used any of that stuff and still had to sit through it. And I have a chip on my shoulder for that, I think. But you know, when you get to like master's and PhD level, it's almost all stuff that's relevant that you pick because you want to study it. So it's more fun at that point, I think.
At that level, is it just reading and writing papers?
And running experiments and like, and so I also had to teach biology classes, and that was a little bit tough because like on one semester I was on the student side of the desk, and then the next semester with no additional teaching I was on the teacher side of the desk, and this was at Bowling Green where we have a teaching program, and so maybe it changed now, but I remember being like, you guys spent 4 years teaching people how to do this, and you've just handed me a manual, and you're like, go nuts. And so it was hard. And I didn't love that part, the like being thrown into teaching without knowing what I was doing. But yeah, mostly you're reading and taking classes and doing experiments.
I never thought about that. That is such a good point where they're like, yep, you're a student and now you're teaching. And we like, just like you said, we gave you no extra knowledge. You just have the stuff you know, and you got to present it to these people. That's such a weird thing.
It was super weird. And I mean, I know other universities teach their grad students a little bit more, but it's still like, you don't get a teaching degree before you start teaching the lab. They're like, you know, maybe you get like a couple hours where they're like, be nice to students and it's good if you're fun or something like that. And, you know, and then also the like harassment training and stuff like that. But, you know, you don't get too much more than that. And so, yeah, it is weird that people pay tons of money for these biology labs to then be taught by people who do not know how to teach. But I mean, maybe it's getting better. I haven't been in grad school. I graduated in 2014. So it's been a while.
Yeah, I'll have to see if I can track some students I know in school and see if that's still the case, because it is a weird thing. I just had one more question about speaking of like teaching and getting in front of people, especially it sounded like you were like thrust into it. Is that something you were comfortable with, or did you have to like get used to being able to talk? Because you said now that you like to give you talk to people and you give presentations and that kind of stuff. Is that something you had to grow into?
So I feel like public talks and teaching are two pretty different skill sets. So when I give a public talk, I'll like make the talk a month or two ahead of time and practice it 20 times so it's all memorized, and then I can worry about my presentation, you know, like how do I deliver this joke or something, and I like that. But if you're lecturing, it's like 3 times a week, an hour lecture each time, and you don't have time to practice that multiple times. So you just have to hope it's in your head and that you can sort of do it on the fly. And I always found that to be really stressful. And partly that's because I always was teaching a course for the first time. I've never had a course that I've taught like 5 years in a row where it hopefully gets easier. And so I always feel like, oh, the students are going to know that I don't have this memorized. And that makes me nervous and uncomfortable. So they're different skills. I prefer public speaking to lecturing because I can memorize one and I don't have the option for the other because you just wouldn't have enough time.
Yeah. I also enjoy public speaking. And I was in a class all day for Miss Durr. She runs a STEM class at the junior high, and she asked if I could come talk to them about podcasting, and it ended up being about whatever. And I'd go through my spiel and be talking to them. And I think like the 4th time I've done this, I turned to her, I go, this is a weird feeling. She goes, what? I go, I don't know if what I'm saying now I said to another class, which I know I did, or I already said it to this class, and I can't, and it's freaking me out a little bit. She's like, yep, welcome to teaching.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so you do stand up, right? George told me you do stand up. And so that's like a very different thing, right? You practice and then you figure out what the audience likes and you know what you're going to say. But yeah, teaching is more off the cuff.
Yeah. The stand up for me is because there's many ways to write anything, even, you know, for jokes. For me, I had to write every single word out, every everything. I wrote everything out and then I would read it and memorize it. Because I tried it once without it and I failed horribly. It was only open mic, but I failed horribly. And then I realized like, okay, well, I can't just go up there not prepared. And that's, you know, I don't do it anymore. It's way down on the list of things that I have time for, but it has helped me as far as like being able to answering questions. Sometimes it can be hard for people, especially when you're giving a presentation and you might know all the information, but you get a question like, "Ooh, I don't know that one." And some people don't like to say, "I don't know." And I'm pretty much, I've said it here and said it everywhere. It's like, hey, I like if I had to say that, because then I can tell you I don't know, but I'll find out for you, and we can get through this together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's key. And I think that's key to teaching also, is being able to say, I don't know, and trying to figure it out. Because I think students can tell when you're making it up and hoping you're getting it right.
Mm-hmm.
And then I feel like they don't trust you going forward. And so you need to get good at saying, I don't know. But, plus it's good for students to know that like nobody knows everything. And there's a process of discovery, and sort of figuring it out together is, that's a good skill for life.
Yeah. Well, no one knows everything except for junior high kids. They know everything. So
yeah.
So you get through school, do your master's, PhD, and I thought I saw in your email that you're currently teaching now too? You're a professor now?
So I'm adjunct, which is like, so I have an affiliation with Rice University. I have a Rice email address, but I don't actually teach right now.
Okay.
And so they don't pay me, but I'm writing books, and I'm working on my second book. And one of the nice things about the affiliation with Rice is that when scientists publish journal articles, they're sometimes behind like a paywall. So you might have to pay $40 to get access to this paper that a scientist wrote, because a journal, put it online and they're charging you for it, which to me is ridiculous, because the public pays for science, and the fact that it's not openly available, I hate. But anyway, if you're affiliated with the university, they have deals with these publishers, so you can get the papers for free. And so writing a book on science is much easier if you have an affiliation and can get all the stuff for free. And so, Bryce and I have this deal where every once in a while I guest lecture and I work on them with some other stuff. And they give me access to journal articles and let me say that I'm from Rice, but I don't actually teach there, and I live in Virginia.
Okay.
And Rice is in Texas.
So I have a question, and it's gonna sound weird. But when I hear scientists, I don't picture people like you. Seem really outgoing and like to talk and all that. Like I picture just someone like, put me in this room and let me go. Is that just a thing that doesn't exist, or do those people exist too?
Those people exist too. I mean, I think different fields have different cultures, for example, and so you might be more likely to find those people in a different field. But there's also there's the stereotype, and then there's everybody else. And so I think there's a lot of people, especially a lot of people in ecology or who study like animal behavior, who just sort of geek out about this stuff and love the chance to talk about it. And so it might be for a lot of us, if you ask us about anything other than our science, we will shut down and have nothing to say. But but yeah, I like to think that's not the case for me. But yeah, I mean, a lot of us get into this because we just like, our dorky hearts love wasps or something like that, and we would talk about it all day if you gave us the chance.
Are there scientists, or some scientists, who believe like the thing we're doing, this part of science, is better than other science? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, it does. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the physicists, not all of them, but a lot of them feel like, biology, like physics is up here and biology is here. And every once in a while, a physicist will come in and have something to say about biology because they think they figured it out in an evening over beer, because biology, if you understand the nature of the universe, clearly you understand all of biology. And Freeman Dyson is so he passed away recently, but he's a physicist who in my mind is sort of famous for doing this. He'll say oh, I figured out this biology problem y'all have been grappling with for decades. And, the answer was easy. And then he also was like, oh, climate change, we don't have to worry about that. As though he had, the climatologist who had been studying it for decades and decades and decades hadn't figured it out, but Freeman Dyson figured it out in an afternoon. But anyway, there's also biologists who think they're better than other fields of biology. This is, humans are always trying to hierarchy, put things in hierarchies, unfortunately.
Well, there's always cliques everywhere you go, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So now you're you said you're writing a second book. What was your first book? See, I feel like a bad interviewer when I'm like, hey, what was your book about? Like I should know.
No, it's all good. No, we're having fun. Fun is yeah. So my first book, so my husband, I wrote this book with my husband. His name is Zach Weinersmith, and he's a cartoonist.
Okay.
And he, so there's this cartoon that he doesn't write called XKCD, which is like this nerd cartoon that all the science nerds really love. And he wrote a book that did really well. And his agent was like, okay, who's the like next nerd cartoonist down on the ladder? Who might write a book that could do well, and that was my husband. And so he writes a comic called Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal. And so my husband got approached about writing a book, and he was like, well, you know, my wife and I, we like doing projects together, and she's really good at research, and like together I think we could write a really good book. So we decided to write a book about emerging technologies. So we wrote a book called Soonish: 10 Emerging Technologies That'll Improve and or Ruin Everything. It's a long title. And it did well. And so he did like comics to sort of illustrate it, and he's funny. And so he like wrote jokes throughout, and I did interviews, and so that did pretty well. And so we published that book, and now we're writing a book about the future of space settlements and sort of like, you know, human bodies and how they respond to space, and what space law says about whether or not we can even start settlements. Did you know there's space law? There's space lawyers. It's crazy. I didn't know that either. We started researching this book, and I was like, that sounds like something out of science fiction. I didn't believe it existed until I interviewed one, but it's a thing.
But now there's Space Force now. I guess there is space law. Someone has to enforce that law, right? And there.
That's right. Yeah.
So the illustration part of it, I think, is a cool detail, because it should or it probably did draw more people in to want to learn about this stuff, because everyone likes pictures, right? Pictures worth 1,000 words. So everyone likes pictures. So it helps people understand what people might not get by being able to see something. I think that's a cool feature or cool part of the book.
Yeah. I think that one, it helped because he could sort of illustrate stuff to make it easier to understand. And then he also put jokes in there.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff we were trying to explain is a little tough, and it's nice to break it up with a laugh. And if the joke sort of like builds on the knowledge, it almost feels like you're in an inside joke. You're like, oh, I just learned that, and I already got the joke. And so, but it was funny. So we got to do an interview on NPR, and because my husband did the artwork, they assumed that I had done all the writing, and he just did like the cute art to support my writing. And so usually, so my husband is a pretty well-known cartoonist. So most of the time when we talk to people, they're like, you're married to Zach, and everybody's like excited about Zach and doesn't care about me. And so it was this funny sort of like different situation for once in my life where people were like assuming that I was the exciting one in the relationship. And so and anyway, so now if stuff like that happens, I explain like, no, Zach did the research also and did the writing. But for that one moment in time, I really enjoyed taking the spotlight for a moment.
Sure, I
anyway.
mean, spotlight makes everyone feel good. I know my sister, she was a grade behind me, and she would always get mad in high school because everyone would come up to her. Well, first of all, they called her Little Lorenzo, but she hated that. And then they'd always come up to her and like tell her things that I did or said. And after a while, she was like, I don't care. What are you doing to me?
What? So that is how it's supposed to work. I feel like with sibling hierarchies, where like, you know, if you're following your sibling, everyone's like, oh, are you, you know, the older sibling's brother or sister? Yeah. That's not how it worked for me, because George's personality was so big that it, you know, eclipsed. And so even though I was older than him, people would be like, are you George's sister? And I'm not supposed to work that way. But yes, I'm George's sister. But that's fine. He's, you know, he's just a ton of fun. Everybody knows George.
That's hilarious. I never thought about that, but it makes sense when you explain it. And also, this would be like the 10th podcast where his name is mentioned. So I joked with him. That I'm going to start calling all of my podcast fans Georges or George Smiths. Those are the name of my podcast fans.
Have you had him on the show?
No, he says he's too busy.
Oh, all right.
I wanted to start one with him about parenting and soon to be parenting, and he was just like, I can't. I got a lot of stuff going on, and I try not to push it. I said, okay, that's fine. Plus, that time difference is a killer for anything like this. Trying to find time, but I do at least once every couple of months. I'm like, hey, you got to at least come on, and we don't have to talk about anything. We just talk, whatever. And so, but he listens, and he is one that's what he obviously told me to contact you, but he does say, hey, this is a good one, and I like it when he texts me and say that was a good interview. I liked it. Ooh, you should think about interviewing this person. Or he does give me ideas, and he's super engaged. Now, I would like to have him on it at some point too, but eventually.
He's super creative and super hilarious. So I hope he finds time to come on the show at some point.
I told him if we lived closer together, we would probably do something like this or something all the time, because we spend a lot of time talking to each other. We'll call each other on the phone or text or whatever, and we always have these ideas of things, and you should do this or you should do that. We'll talk back and forth, and we just can't ever get together because he lives all the way out west. So eventually,
the 3-hour time difference, it's tough.
Yeah. The when you're talking about giving presentations and including jokes, that's one of my favorite things to do, because I've been in so many presentations where it's just, here's the information. Sometimes the worst is when people just read things off of the PowerPoint we're looking at. We're also looking at that. Why don't you give us extra information, or just like gloss over the stuff and get to what you need or whatever. But my mom is really good at giving presentations. She works for the Northwest Ohio Safety Council. She gives boring presentations all the time because of the not she's boring, but the material. But she's really good at it, and people constantly say how good she is. She makes jokes and all this stuff. But I think that's important to have that extra little thing, because it gets in people's minds like, oh, this is an important conversation, but it gets them to focus.
Yeah. So I mean, this is another thing where, so scientists, we have to teach without being taught how to teach. And we also present without really presenting is a skill in itself, and one of the reasons I feel so lucky that I went to Perrysburg is because I was on speech team and drama and the drama club. And in both of those, they drill into you need to practice this. Every presentation you give is a performance. And so you should memorize the jokes and memorize the timing. And I've been to so many conferences where people, if you get them afterwards and you give them a beer and they're telling you about their research, they're so animated and excited. But when they're up there, they're reading off the PowerPoint, and their voice is always staying stable, and they don't sound excited. And you're like, well, if you were bored, why should I not be bored? And I think it's just, if you haven't practiced a bunch of times, your brain is working so hard to be all right, what am I supposed to say next, that you can't let your enthusiasm show through. Or some people, just get stage fright, and there's nothing you can do about that. Although I do think practice helps with that, but it's somebody who sounds like they're excited and isn't reading off of a PowerPoint presentation and makes a joke sometimes. I hope you remember what they say more than the people who, sound kind of bored.
Yeah, I like that statement. We're you sound bored, so I'm gonna be bored. That's good. I like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm gonna escape into my head and think about something else, because if you're not interested in this, I don't know why I should be interested in this. That feels like the minimum for a presentation is you should sound interested in what you're saying.
Yeah.
But again, it takes practice, and people get scared.
Do you have a when someone asks hey, come give this presentation, do you have a favorite presentation that you like to give, or is it about the wasps?
I do like talking about the wasps. Yeah. So I gave a talk for Iowa City Darwin Day last weekend, and I got to talk about parasite manipulation of host behavior. And then I also really like watching zombie movies.
Okay.
And so I have this talk where I talk about okay, so in zombie movies, you see this a lot. And does that match up with what you see in nature when animals are manipulated? So for example, if there's a bunch of zombies and you're trying to figure out how you're going to get away from them, and you're hiding behind a tree, the zombies are usually moving very slowly and sort of lumbering around. What happens to the activity of animals? And it turns out that when animals are infected by parasites that need one host to get eaten by the next host. So for example, I study a fish where a parasite lives on its brain. And if it wants to get to the next host in its life cycle, a bird needs to eat that fish. Okay. And that's how the parasite gets where it needs to go. And so there's a lot of these kinds of connections in nature where parasites change the behavior of their host to try to get them eaten. And like, it turns out that in a lot of those, what's happening is they slow the animals down and they sort of make them like lumber around sort of like, you know, zombies sort of brainlessly. And that seems to get them more likely to be eaten by birds. And so anyway, I like talking about parasite manipulation. That's probably my favorite topic right now. But I think when I start talking about space settlements, when the book comes out, I'll like that too.
That I heard that same thing, like a parasite like that one ultimately once they get into a cat will get into a mouse, and basically the mouse loses all seemingly loses all fear of cats, and basically, like you said, hey, I'm here, eat me.
So that is a super complicated system that gets way simplified when it gets explained in the news.
I'm sure.
So, yeah, and so what's supposed to be happening there is that the rodents, instead of being afraid of the smell of cat urine, so in particular, this is about the smell of cat urine. Okay. So instead of being afraid of that smell as like a cue that like predators live here, they're actually attracted to that smell. And if you like do, you know, scans of their brains, like the part of their brain that is, you know, shows fear stops lighting up, and the part of their brain that's like would be like attracted to mates or something lights up, and they're like, oh, this is great. And so they're supposed to spend a lot of time around cat urine, and we think that gets them eaten, but nobody has actually shown that because none of us feel comfortable setting up experiments where cats go and kill rats because they're both fuzzy and cute. And so nobody wants to do that. And so we haven't actually proved that this connection does the thing we think it's going to do, but it sure sounds like it should. But some strains of rat, when you infect them by the parasite, don't show this attraction to cat urine, and some of them do. And so it actually is this like hard to understand. We don't know why you see it sometimes and why you don't, but the story gets simplified when it goes into like, you know, the popular press. It's actually something that we're still trying to work out, I would say.
So you're telling me there's not one evil scientist out there they're willing to set up this experiment to know for sure?
So there's probably one evil scientist, but the problem is we have committees that have to approve our work with animals beforehand. Okay. And so that one evil scientist probably can't get through committee. But there was this interesting study. So there are these people who study spotted hyenas. So I didn't do this research. I'm talking about someone else's. Okay. And they've been following these hyenas for 30 years. And every once in a while, they'll dart them and draw blood, and they'll sort of track their behavior over time. And by drawing blood, they can find out if the hyenas are infected by this parasite. And then they look to see if the infected hyenas are more likely to get killed by lions, because lions are cats, and that's the next host in the life cycle. And it turns out that when they're cubs, like when the hyenas are young, if they're infected by the parasite, they get closer to lions, and they're more likely to get killed by lions. And so that's an experiment where like nobody had to set up animals to die. We're just sort of watching what happens in nature. And that's sort of the best evidence we have for the parasite maybe changing behavior in ways that get it eaten by the cats. But this has nothing to do with the smell of urine, and the effect goes away when the hyenas get older. And also lions kill hyenas, but don't eat them. So it's not clear that they're actually getting infected. They just sort of kill them so that they, I don't know, maybe so they have fewer competitors. But again, it gets complicated. And the best we can do is sort of observe what's happening in nature, because we aren't comfortable doing these experiments in the lab.
So did you pick wasps and fish because you are more comfortable killing, setting up experiments where the thing isn't fuzzy?
Yeah, that is part of it. And then
I would imagine.
Also like, I mean, toxoplasmosis, that's a disease that humans can get too. And so the parasite we were talking about is Toxoplasma gondii. And I wanted to study something that couldn't infect me. And then also, like, if you tell people you study wasps, they want you to kill them. And so like you feel a little bit less bad because everyone hates wasps. But the wasps that I study are actually super tiny. So can I tell you about the wasp that I study?
Please. Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So I study two wasps, one kills the other. And so the first wasp, the host wasp, is a cynipid gall wasp. So sometimes if you see an oak tree, you'll see that there's like weird growths on the leaves or on the stems. There'll be like, it almost looks like a wart is growing on the tree. That can be caused by fungus and viruses, but it can also be caused by wasps. And so they lay, like a mom wasp will lay an egg, and it will sort of manipulate the tree into making this compartment that the egg will develop inside of. And that compartment is lined with nutritious tissue. So the egg will hatch, and then the wasp will like eat all of this delicious plant stuff. And then it hides in this little compartment. And when it becomes an adult, it chews a hole out and goes off to complete its life cycle. So there's a bunch of wasps that do this. And the one that I study is the Crypt Gall Wasp. So it lays, which is a great name. And so it lays its eggs in stems. And the kind of gall that it makes is called a crypt. So it's sort of cryptic. It's hard to see. It's just this like little compartment inside of a stem. And when they are done, they chew a little hole out. And so if you see stems with these tiny little perfect holes in them, they've got wasps that have emerged from it. So that's the host.
Okay.
And then there's a parasitoid wasp. And what it does is it walks along the stem and it figures out that there's a crypt beneath. And we don't know how it finds these things because they're very hard to see. It could be that it smells it. It could be that they like feel vibrations of the insects moving inside. We don't know how they figure it out, but they do. And then the mom parasitoid lays an egg inside of the crypt with the host wasp that's in there already. And then the host wasp is manipulated into making a smaller than usual emergence hole, but it doesn't get out. It makes this tiny little hole and it sort of like peeks out with one of its eyes, and then it never moves again. And the parasitoid eats its insides and kills it. And which is super creepy. And then when the parasitoid is done emerging, it eats a hole through the host's head and emerges through its head, which is just incredible. And so we, my collaborator at Rice, he brought this stem back from the lab, and he noticed all of these little like eyes sort of peeking out from the stem. And he was like, what's going on? Usually these wasps come out, they don't get stuck. And he noticed that there was, if you like dissected these crypts, there was this other wasp in there in every instance where they looked like they had gotten stuck. And so then he called me in because I study behavioral interactions in these situations. And he was like, is something weird going on here? And so we decided, well, what might be happening is that the parasitoid is making the host create an emergence hole because it can't get out on its own. And so like the process of chewing through the stem to get out is actually kind of hard. You have to have like really strong mouth parts. So we put a tiny little bark over those heads that were sort of peeking out. And we discovered that the parasitoid could almost never get out on its own. So it couldn't chew through just a little bit of bark. So it was 3 times more likely to die trapped in the crypt if it had to get out on its own. And so it looks like they essentially get the host to make an escape route, and then they kill the host and eat it. And then they escape through its head, which is super creepy. And the parasitoid had not been described by science. So we got to give it a name. We called it the Crypt Keeper Wasp because my mom used to like Tales from the Crypt.
That's so good.
And that was super fun. And then we named it after, we had to give it a scientific name too. And so we named it after Set, who was the Egyptian god of chaos. And he trapped his brother Osiris in a crypt and scattered his body parts around afterwards. And if you dissect these crypts, after the parasitoid has eaten the host, it's sort of like its body parts are all over the crypt. And we were like, oh, this is perfect. And so anyway, it was super fun getting to describe a species and then discovering that it like seems to be manipulating its the host behavior. And this was all happening like on the trees outside of our offices, and nobody had seen it before. There's so much stuff that remains to be discovered. It's very exciting.
So I would imagine there's some people now that's that is super exciting and it's cool and to know like all these things are just like right outside, that you don't even know you're seeing. But I would imagine people will ask you like, why are you looking at these things?
Yeah, so that's a totally reasonable question. So do you mean why? Like, how does this benefit humans?
Yeah. Like, what I mean, someone would probably say like, what is well, it's America. It's like, what do I get out of this? Like, what, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So the canned answer that I usually give for that is so let's go back to my fish because it's a little easier to explain in the fish.
Mhm.
So in the fish, there's this trematode that lives on the fish's brain. And it seems like what it's doing is when the fish gets stressed out, the fish's brain signature. Okay, so when a fish gets stressed out, there's certain chemicals in a certain part of its brain that start like amping up in concentration. And that's how they respond normally to stress.
Mhm.
When they have these parasites on the brain, that stress response gets like way pressed down. And we think that what's happening is that the fish is not responding to stress the way it should. And that gets it eaten by the next host in the life cycle.
Yeah.
And so parasites have been living on these fish's brains probably for millions of years. And through the process of natural selection, they've been like tinkering with the way the brain works over all this time. And so, we as neuroscientists are sort of new to thinking about how the brain works.
Mhm.
Whereas these parasites have been sort of tinkering with host brains for a really long time. So if you can bring them into the lab and see like, okay, this parasite understands how stress works. And this is like a very anthropomorphic way of saying it.
Mhm.
But if we can understand what it's doing, then maybe we can understand how brains work better. And so we got funding from the Norwegian government because I have a Norwegian collaborator by arguing that maybe one day this will help us create an anti-anxiety or an depression drug by figuring out like, does this parasite make a specific compound that slows down the stress response? And for some of us who are like overstressed and are worried about stuff we shouldn't be worrying about, maybe these drugs will help sort of calm that stress response down. And so in general, studying how parasites are able to control host behavior, if we can understand that, maybe we'll have a better understanding of how brains work and how behavior works by figuring out what's going on in these systems. Because often we think that a parasite is making a compound, and maybe we can make that in the lab and we can do something useful with it.
Mm-hmm. My favorite thing, you said it a few times, is when you say, we think this is why they're doing this, or we think this is what's going on, because that's what science is, right? We think this is happening, so we're going to test it. It's not happening. Okay, well then now this is what we think. And all that, I say that because that's the past 2 years in our pandemic. People get all up in arms about, well, they said this and now they're saying this. Like, yeah, that's how science works. Like, we're figuring these things out. And I love that you say that, like, hey, we think this is happening. We're going to test it and go from there. And I love that you say that.
Yeah, it has been so frustrating through the COVID pandemic watching, like, because people do, in a lot of cases, look to scientists for answers, but like don't necessarily understand how the science process works. And so like, I think, initially we thought that, COVID was being passed on like cardboard boxes. And so you needed to like wipe down the cardboard boxes when your Amazon package came, for example. And then it turns out that that's not how it passes. And, the reason we know that is because we collected more data. And, but every time the answer changes, like I've talked to people who are like, no, scientists have changed their mind too much. I don't believe it. I'm just doing what I think is right. And I get that because it's frustrating, especially with something that's controlling so much of your life. These like, people, you have to wipe down the boxes. That's a huge pain in the rear end, and maybe every time you go to the grocery store and you get stuff, now you're scared. Like, did I just bring COVID home with my macaroni and cheese? And like, I get the frustration. But it would be nice if more people understood how science works so they could know like, the answers are going to change, but hopefully they get better over time or more accurate over time. But yeah, science is a process and that can be frustrating, but it is what it is.
Sure. Let's go back to your wasps. I don't want to lose sight of that. So now you figured out that this wasp needs the this hole to get out because it can't get out on its own. So where are you at now with like with that particular wasp? Is your work done with that one? Like, we figured all these things out, this is what's happening, or is there more things that you're doing with this particular wasp?
So at the moment, I'm not doing much, but I'm hoping to get back to it. I've been pretty busy with the book project right now. But so this PhD student named Anna Ward found out that this wasp is actually manipulating a lot of other species. And so it's on lots of different oak trees. It's manipulating lots of species to do sort of the same thing, chew the hole for it. And so we're just sort of trying to, so that suggests that the way the parasite changes the behavior to get the host to start chewing this hole must be something pretty general if it can pull this trick on lots of different species.
Sure.
So we're trying to figure out how it does that. And then I'd also love to know how does the mom parasitoid wasp find the other wasps when they're hiding in these like little hidey holes? And partly that's like finding the right people who can like measure chemicals that come off of trees. And then also this wasp is amazingly iridescent. So like if you put it under a microscope and you change the angle of the light, it like changes colors. It goes from like a purple to a blue to a green to a yellow. And like, why does this wasp that lives in darkness for so much of its life need to be this like beautiful color? Like I showed it to my mom and she was like, I would love to have jewelry like that. And I was like, yes, me too. They're gorgeous. Yeah. And so just trying to figure out why they do this. Because there's a lot of wasps that spend most of their lives hidden inside of trees that are these beautiful colors. And I'm just trying to figure out why they bother doing that is another thing I'd like to answer. But right now I'm mostly writing books.
It's cool that when you first explained the wasp, it came from someone else saying, hey, you know more about this than I do. Look at this. You said it again where you're like, yeah, we got to get somebody who can measure all this stuff. I think when people think of scientists, they think like, oh, that they work by themselves or maybe with one other person. But it sounds like with this thing, you've worked with 3, 4, 5 different people that know different things about this whole process, and you guys come together to focus on this one thing.
Oh yeah. One of the things I love about science is you get to make like tons of science buddies because everybody like science is so complicated. And over time you sort of specialize on like small, narrower and narrower topics that to answer a question well, you usually have to work with other people. So my friend Scott Egan was the one who like collected these stems. So he likes gall wasps in general. And he always has Ziploc bags in his pocket because he never knows when he's going to see a cool gall and need to collect it and study it. And so he just always has Ziploc bags. And so he brought one back and then he brought me on the team. And then we brought Andrew Forbes on the team because he's like an expert in identifying these species. And then we pulled our buddy Miles Zhang onto the team because he is a macro photographer or he photographs very tiny things. And to identify these things, you need to like know the vein patterns. And so that when you think of wasps, you usually think of like yellow jackets or something, but this wasp is so tiny, it like can fit on your pinky nail with room to spare. And so we needed to get a photo of a wing on a super teeny tiny little wasp. And so we brought another guy in with Ryan Riddenbaugh, this other guy who also they did the photos. And so, yeah, like lots of different experts were needed to get this complete picture. And yeah, like one of the great things about science is you get to meet new people with new skill sets. And sometimes that's not great because, not everybody is nice to work with. But,
sure. Yeah.
But I've met lots of great people that way. And in particular, the team on this WASP project have all been like amazing people. It's been super fun to get to know them. So yeah, science is actually a very social activity a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's awesome because I think, well, I try to do it with my kids. My son specifically, he likes to play Fortnite, so he's talking to his buddies. I'm just glad like I don't know if they're conversations. He's just talking about the video game, but he's talking, right? And that's what I want. Like, don't just stare down at he doesn't have a phone, but don't just stare down, with whatever you're looking at. Like, have conversations with people. So I enjoy that he does that. I've also he's 10. I've been working with him. Like, when people ask you questions, like answer the question. I know you're 10. You can give one word answers, but at least answer the question. Don't just stare at them or do whatever. Be social. And I think that's important. So if you can get all that, especially with you in particular, you're all coming together with something you love to do. So that just makes it even better for everybody. Yes, we're social, we're coming together, but we also love this thing. So you're even more excited about it. So I'm hoping, like I tell kids, like find something you really like to do because it just makes it so much better for yourself and for people that you bring in to this thing.
Yeah, that's one of the things I wish I could have told 16-year-old Kelly, like when you become an adult and you find a career, you're going to be surrounded by people who like the same things that you like, and it will be like easy to find your group, you know, like easy to find the people who understand you. And yeah, so I try to explain that to my kids too. And then my daughter, she's 8. And so I've been working on not just getting her to answer people's questions, but to also then be like, and what about you? Like if they ask how you're doing, you also need to ask how they're doing, because it's got to be a two-way thing. But it's surprisingly hard to teach kids that. I'm sure the pandemic hasn't helped. But I think she's getting a little bit better about stuff like that, but it's hard.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that. I'm going to start working with him. Like, hey, this is, like you said, it's a two-way street here, you know, and all these base level questions are what people ask at a class reunion anyway. So let's hey, how are you doing? I'm good. How are you doing? Perfect. Let's end it there. Everyone won. Let's go. Let's get out of here. You know. So hopefully
right.
we'll get that way. So let's get to your new book you're writing about space. And first of all, how did you say like, hey, we're going to write this book?
So I am always afraid. I have this like perpetual fear of boredom, and I like to constantly be doing like very different things so that I never can get bored. And space is a thing that I've always been sort of interested in, but I also have like an obsessive personality. And if I start something, I want to really get into it, and it's not worth it to me to just get into it a little. I need to go all or nothing. And so
which is good for us, which is good for a scientist, right?
Yeah. I like to think it's not a great feature overall, but I like to think it's been good in my career.
Yeah.
And so like, you know, so my husband was like, you know, it would be fun to think about how polar expeditions, like early era, you know, trying to get to the South Pole first, what lessons you can learn from that might be helpful while we try to settle space. And I was like, oh, that would be fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so we like sort of got excited about sort of trying to understand what it's going to be like when we settle space. And we read all of these stories about polar expeditions, and the stories were like totally epic. And at the end, after reading like, you know, 50 biographies and stuff like that, we decided actually there's nothing here that NASA doesn't know already. Like all of the lessons are pretty obvious. Things like you need to plan to bring enough food. The food needs to be shelf stable. You should make sure the people who are going are mentally stable. There's a story about a guy who was sort of young and developed schizophrenia when they were all sort of stuck on the ice together. And it was a scary situation. But anyway, so then we just sort of got interested in like, well, how do human bodies respond to space? And like, what are the main problems and how well do we understand it? So like, for example, what do you think? Do you think we know about space radiation and whether or not it causes cancer?
I would think no, we don't.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I thought yes. So no, I assumed that
I just assume and this is just me, but I just assume if I ever heard about it, that then enough people don't know about it. So I get where you come from. Like, yes, any radiation would cause cancer, but my thought was like, well, how do we even know where like. I never even heard of space radiation, so I wouldn't even know that thing exists. So your way of thinking about it was way more correct than mine, to be honest. So I mean, I thought like the International Space Station has been up there for like 20 years. We've sent 600 astronauts to space almost. Like surely we figured some of this stuff out. Yeah. But it turns out that the International Space Station is inside of what's called the Van Allen belts, which protect you and I from radiation also. And so the kinds of radiation you get in space are different than what you get on Earth. And we actually don't know if they cause cancer or not, because it's hard to study and we haven't had astronauts exposed to it. And it's hard to do experiments with rats on Earth that do a good job of simulating space radiation. So like people talk about starting settlements on space, but we don't even know if you can survive with space radiation. And so to me, the whole field is like way less far along than I would have guessed. Mm-hmm. And so the book is just sort of about like, what do we know and what do we not know about whether or not humans can survive in space and whether or not it's legal. And it sort of grew out of this initial interest in explorers in other areas, which ended up sort of not going anywhere. And so I feel like an important part of science is like going in one direction and then being willing to accept I made a mistake. There's nothing interesting happening here.
where do I go next? And hopefully where we decided to go next was still interesting.
Do you ever feel a couple things? Do you ever feel like and maybe it's part of science, but do you ever feel like you're doing all this stuff and then you get to the end, you're like you said, well, I guess that's the end. Like, I just feel like there should be, like, it's a bad movie and there should be a better payoff.
Yes. So my PhD with these fish that I mentioned, like, so all this brain chemistry stuff was changing. And so I was like, I bet fish who are infected by these parasites are also like more active and less social. And like, I had all of these predictions. And at the end of 5 years, the answer was, nah.
That's so long. That's such a long movie with no payoff.
I know. But like, I mean, the important thing in like, no is an answer. Sure, it's not the answer you wanted, but in science, as long as you like, I had done a big enough experiment that I'm sure the answer is no. Mm-hmm. And the best you can ask for in science is a clear answer. And the clear answer is you wasted 5 years, but it's all right. It was a clear answer. And now I moved on to something else.
Sure. In space, you talked about space radiation, and I feel like anytime someone puts the word space in front of something, it's made like, it sounds made up, like space rocks, space water, space radiation, space force, like all these things are, it seems make-believe. And I'm obviously it's not, like I said, it's space radiation. It just doesn't sound like something that exists, but it's because you're saying this book that you thought we are so far along and we're not. Maybe that's part of it too. Maybe because we don't know all this stuff, it sounds make-believe. I mean, I'm sure when you first told people about this wasp that has to eat its host through its head to get out, like, no, that doesn't exist. What are you, crazy? So all these things, it just seems like it's pretend until people actually like do things.
Yeah. So one, I totally agree with you. And two, it's weird, like space. I think whenever anything happens in space, people automatically think it's like way more epic than it really is. So there was like this story. So we were, the first space station that America put up was called Skylab. And there's this story that the third crew mutinied, and mutiny is like a really serious word. Like on this, it means that you are like, we're not listening anymore. We're doing our own thing. You completely like stop paying attention to, the people who are supposed to be in control. But what really happened was that the crew felt like they were being kind of overworked. So they scheduled a call with ground control to be like, can we back off on some things a little bit? And that was it. And this got called a mutiny. Like everything in space is like blown way out of proportion. And I think we all just find space to be like maybe way more fascinating than it has any right to be. Like the astronauts say that like every time, we read tons of astronaut biographies, which for the most part are awful because they're written by engineers. And my dad's an engineer and I love him. But like, it's tons of pages about like, well, this switch wasn't doing the thing it was supposed to. And then like a paragraph about their friend who died. And you're like, reverse those things. I'm way more interested in the like personal stories. I don't care about the switch. But anyway, where was I going with? Oh, so apparently in astronaut biographies, everybody, they report that every time somebody has a chance to ask them a question, they want to know about how you go to the bathroom in space. Sure. And like all of these details that most people don't care about, when it happens in space, suddenly everybody really cares about it. And so, yeah, I think it's a combination of, it does sound like fiction. And also we just imagine space to be like super epic when really it's just kind of like stinky and it's just humans in a different environment. But
if your research led you to a chance to go up in one of those rockets that people have been going up in, would you do that?
No, I don't think so.
No, it does. And so it does not seem appealing to me.
Yeah. So why does it not seem appealing to you?
I'm terrified. That's why, like, I would never want to do that. I've rode roller coasters, but even those terrify me. So I hate flying in airplanes. So like all these things lead to me like, nah, you don't want to do that. Plus it's also so new. Like if someone were like, hey, tomorrow we're going to go do this thing, I don't buy an Xbox for 2 years for them to get all the work all the bugs out. I'm not going to go up in this plane in this rocket you guys just made last year.
Yeah, I agree on all of those points. I also get like motion sickness.
Oh my gosh,
and so I'm sure I would just be like throwing up like, so I went to go visit George. We're going to talk about George again. George in Brazil when he was teaching down there, and we went hang gliding. And I remember we were like up on, it seemed like a mountain. It was probably a hill, but in my head, it was like a mountain. And the guy was like attached to my back. And he's like, okay, when I count to 3, we both need to run, but we can't trip, because if we trip, we're going to fall down the mountain. So and then he was like, go. And it's good he didn't give me time to think about it. But so we ran and we didn't trip. And then he was under me. And the whole time I remember thinking, I'm going to puke on his head.
Oh,
like
no.
I feel like I'm going to throw up. And like, it was a beautiful view, but mostly I was thinking I need to puke. And I thought the same thing when I jumped out of a plane. What is that called?
Skydiving.
Skydiving. Thank you. Yeah. They just make me sick.
Yeah.
And so I think I'd go up there and I would just puke on everyone, and nobody would want me there.
You're just floating around. What's worse, space puke or space radiation? Right?
Yeah, that's right. I think there are problems on different scales. You eventually stop puking, and then the radiation problem kicks in. And I have no desire to go to. If somebody said like, would you like to be one of the first people to live on the moon? Absolutely not. No. It's like, for the safety reasons you noted, and then also there's like, I really like trying to discover new wasps. There's like no new wasp species to be discovered on the moon, and like it holds no appeal to me.
As I got older, all the motion sickness really like amped up. It always used to be there a little bit, but it really amped up. And it came to a head about 3 years ago when we went to Disney World for the first time, took our kids, and we rode Mission to Mars, I think. And basically what it is you feel like you're in a rocket, but it's just because you're spinning so fast. And we got off that ride. Well, first of all, you can pick 2 tracks. One that's less intense and one that's more intense. We're like, well, how intense can this be? So we took our kids on it. My daughter, we started spinning. She was freaking out a little bit, and I was too. But as a parent, you gotta be cool. So I was like holding her hand. I'm like, it's okay. We'll get through it. It's fun. Blah blah blah. We got off. My wife and I had to sit down for like 20 minutes. We didn't throw up, but we could not move anywhere. I felt so bad. And when we went this past Christmas, we were like, we're definitely not doing that, right? It's gonna ruin our vacation.
Yeah. It gets worse for me too. As I even like, we live in the country, and even now when we go down country roads, I'm like, I kind of feel like I'm gonna. And the last time I went to Cedar Point, I went around one of the curves on one of the rides, and I was like, woo! And I passed out.
No way.
I blacked out around one of the corners, and I was like, I'm like a million years old. I used to love, the mantis or whatever trip, and now I pass out down around the corners, and getting old is a bummer.
Sure. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, Kelly, I said an hour, so we won't go too much, but we spent probably only 20 minutes talking about actually what you do. Because it's the first time I'm talking to you for this podcast, so I want all that beginning information. So at some point, even if it's during this process of this new book or some other things you're doing, it'd be great to have you back on to talk more about things and to get more in depth in some of that stuff. We talked about the fish a little bit, but I'm sure there's more there too. So eventually I'll have you back on. I think it's cool. And this is one of the podcasts where I'm like, man, I wish this thing was more popular, because this is a really good podcast. There's a lot of information and a lot of cool things that I think people would like.
Yeah. So first of all, I can't believe it's been an hour. When you said don't want to keep you for more than an hour, I looked at my watch and like, I can't believe it's already been an hour. This was a lot of fun. Yeah. And I really enjoyed listening to your interview with Jake. So,
nice. Thank you.
This is a super fun podcast. Thank you for inviting me. I had fun, and I'd be happy to come back on and talk about my parasites whenever you like.
Oh, one thing, and I forgot because it's so new. I just did it this last episode, but I'm doing a thing. I listened to this new podcast. It's a Learning Leaders podcast, and this particular guest, he was saying, like, you spend so much time at work, you have to find something you love about work to help you get there. Because you wake up in the morning, you can't. My dad worked at a factory for 30 years, and he hated his job, and I never wanted to be like that. So I wanted to find something I love to do. And the new question I'm asking people at the end of the podcast is, what is something you love about your job that every morning you wake up, or maybe not every morning, but more times than not, you're like, ooh, I get to do this thing today, or I get to talk to this person, or I'm doing this present. Like, what is something you love about what you do?
So I love that, like, so with this wasp, for example, this is, maybe the wasp isn't going to cure cancer, but it's a thing that nobody knew about before. Mm-hmm. And we were able to like explain it to people. And there were a bunch of, people who got excited about it. And like, we've added to the knowledge in the world in some way. And so, and like when I have a data set in front of me, I'll pull up an Excel sheet, and Excel is really boring, right? Mm-hmm. But there's answers to like things that are happening in the world that people don't know about yet, that we might be able to figure out, from the data in that spreadsheet. So the fact that there's things about the world that my collaborators and I might be able to figure out that we didn't know before, and we'll kind of know after we finish our work, is really exciting to me. Just the fact that we can bring some new knowledge into the world and sort of understand something better that we didn't understand before. To me, that's pretty exciting. And I just, I get to look at pretty wasps all day. That's really fun. What about you?
What do I love? So I work for the Toledo Metro Parks. I've been there it's coming up on 2 years. And one of the things I didn't know I liked until a few months ago, and it makes sense because I've been coaching football for 10 years, is I like staff development. And I've been working with our staff development manager on coming up with new things and things that I can do to help our organization. And it made sense to me after, like, just last week, I go, I like staff development because I'm developing employees to be better or to get things that they want to do. It's the same thing with football players. Like I help develop these players to be better football players or better men, better people in general. Like, so it made sense that I would gravitate towards this part of my job. And it's fun because it gets me to talk to people. And that's obviously I do this podcast, but I like talking to people and finding things out. Like, what do you, and I asked my guys at work. I have 2 full-time guys. I asked them, it's like, what do you love about this job? Like, what do you want to do, or where do you want to go? Are you in your position, or do you want to keep going? And if you want to keep going up, I'll help you do that. Even if I risk losing you, we can't be afraid as an organization to lose people. Otherwise, we're not going to develop them the way the way that they want to be developed. So that's the part I like. I like being able to develop people and help them reach, where they want to be ultimately.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah. I never thought I'd be in staff development or HR or anything like that, but it's the people part of it that I like, not so much the paperwork. I don't think really anybody likes paperwork. Maybe a scientist. Yeah. I don't know.
No. What if you had told me that it'd be like sorting through fish brains when I was 16? I would have been like super depressed about my future prospects. So, you never know where you're going to end up and what's going to, make you feel fulfilled at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, Kelly, thanks again for coming on the podcast. This was awesome. And I'll be reaching out again at some point to learn more science from you. It was great.
Great. Thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun. It was great talking to you. You asked great questions.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody, for checking out this episode of the Nerdball Podcast. Please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're hearing this, on any of the podcatchers, on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. We're coming at you 2 times a week now, audio and video. Check us out on all the social medias. Just search the Nerdball Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We're out there. Gmail is the nerdballpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to shoot us an email, we'll be happy to get back to you. Thanks to Real JP Multimedia, Cuttlefish Graphics, Perrysburg Junior High STEM Lab, and Big Daddy Graphics for helping out the podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.